Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for today's virtual program, The Dichotomy of Dr. Dunton, Occupational Therapy and the Baltimore Album Quilts. We're excited that you're all with us today, and we really hope for you to engage with us and your fellow attendees in the chat box throughout the program. You can do this by clicking the chat icon across the bottom of your screen, and make sure, if you'd like everybody to see your message, that you are sending it to all panelists and attendees. You can start by letting us know where you're watching from today. In addition, if you have any questions for our panelists at any point during the program, please type them into the Q&A box, also located at the bottom of your screen. We've set some time aside at the end of the program to answer your questions. I also want to mention that we have closed captioning available if you'd like to use it. Click on the arrow above the closed caption icon to turn them on. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Margot Kopera, who will be leading today's program. Margot is the manager of public programs at the Maryland Center for History and Culture, and is also an educator and public historian. She's a graduate of St. Mary's College of Maryland with a background in historical archaeology, and also a graduate of Johns Hopkins University with a master's degree in museum studies. She has been part of the project team for Wild and Untamed, Dunton's discovery of the Baltimore Album Quilts, which opened in September of this year and is the inspiration for today's program. She also worked on the project team for one of our recent exhibitions, quilt exhibitions, Hometown Girl, the Contemporary Quilts of Mimi Dietrich, which closed in March. Over the past 2 years, working on these projects, she's developed a newfound appreciation for quilts in American culture. And Margot, we're so glad that you're here to welcome our guests, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone out there who are watching today. Thank you for joining us. We really have a great program for you, and a great group of people. And today I am joined by a very dynamic team of experts that all lent their expertise to the Wild and Untamed exhibition. And let's get started. Let me first introduce Vaune Kopeck. Vaune has been working in the area of mental health. Hi, Vaune. Vaune has been working in the area of mental health and practicing occupational therapy for 30 years. She is devoted to meaningful occupation-based interventions to people with mental behavioral health challenges to increase their quality of life in the community. Vaune is an occupational therapist at the Residential Treatment Center at Sheppard Pratt. And Vaune, you are also the residential, let me get this right, the rehabilitation services coordinator there. Welcome, Vaune. Thank you for joining us today virtually. And my question for you is, you've spent 24 out of the 30 years at Sheppard Pratt. And what has kept you grounded for 24 years at Sheppard Pratt?
Being able to engage with the patients with meaningful activities and to see the growth and progress that they've made throughout their stay here, and the transition back into the community.
I see. So that's really been your the 24 years that really keeps you going.
It's always a challenge and an enjoyment.
And for those of you out there who are not from Maryland, the Sheppard and Enoch Pratt Hospital, known here simply as Sheppard Pratt, is a psychiatric hospital located in Towson, Maryland, which is a suburb of Baltimore City. It was founded in 1853 and is one of the oldest private psychiatric hospitals in the nation. Do I have that about right, Vaune?
Correct.
Okay. The next person I'm going to introduce to our team is Lisa Illum. She is the librarian and archivist at Sheppard Pratt. And prior to Sheppard Pratt, she was an academic librarian who also acted as an advisor for the school's occupational therapy program. And this is where you gained, Lisa, a new appreciation for the importance of occupational therapy for our daily lives. Was there something that triggered that appreciation for OT?
Really just seeing what it's able to do for people. It doesn't have to be somebody necessarily with a mental illness. It can be any normal human being or non-normal human being also. We just, the strides that people are able to make and the therapeutic aspects are just so important. And I think especially now. So always kind of had a little special place in my heart.
And we will talk about the now later on in the program. Well, welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us. Also, many people may not know that Sheppard Pratt actually has a little museum space on campus. And Lisa, you have something to do with that. The first time I knew about it, Vaune introduced it to me last February already. It's been that long. You're also, Lisa, the caretaker of this in a way.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
What is on display there? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's the Robert M. and Diane Gibson Museum, and it is 3 rooms. I like to call the first room the Moses Sheppard room. The second room is the Enoch Pratt room, and the third is the Moses and Enoch Pratt room. So it has various hospital artifacts gearing from not just occupational therapy, but just life at the hospital from the very beginning to where we are today.
Yes. When I briefly got to look at it, which of course was right before we all started to go into a quarantine situation, the plan was to invite our audience at our museum to visit there as well. And unfortunately, it is still kind of off limits right now, right, Lisa? And
yes,
hopefully someday soon.
Yeah.
We can visit it.
If anyone is interested in setting up a time to come see there's a link for the museum on the Sheppard Pratt website at sheppardpratt.org. And my contact information is there. You can just contact me. And when it is safe again to allow visitors into the facility, I will be more than happy to set up any tours.
Yes, and actually we're going to put that link in our chat. We have lots of good information we're going to be plugging in our chat today. So keep an eye on that function, that Zoom function there. As the caretaker of this museum and these collections, there are some things items from Dunton, some of which you graciously have loaned to us for our exhibition, which we'll talk about. And also one interesting fact, you don't quilt, right?
Not even a little.
Not even a little, but you do know how to sew a button, I think.
Yes, I can do that.
That's right. Well, welcome, Lisa. Welcome, Vaune. And the last person that is going to join our team today is going to bring the quilt expertise to the conversation. It is our very own Allison Tolman. Welcome, Allie.
Hi, welcome.
Allison is the Vice President of Culture. Vice President of Collections and Interpretation here at the Maryland Center for History and Culture. And as the curator of Wild Untamed, worked again with our quilt collection. which is the largest collection of Baltimore Album Quilts in the country. Is that
In the world.
in the world?
Yes, granted, there's not a lot of people collecting Baltimore album quilts outside of the country, but our collection is internationally famous. They have traveled as far as Tokyo. We actually have a joint publication from that exhibition. So they are internationally famous and the largest collection in the world of Baltimore album quilts.
And I'm sure we have lots of Baltimore Album Quilt fans out there today. So give a shout out in our chat. I'm sure you're there. I hope you're there. We can hear from you. Well, thank you, Vaune, Lisa, and Allie for joining us and joining me today for what I know is going to be a really engaging program where we're going to dive into Dr. Dunton's journey into what seems to be very opposing things, his medical work and what becomes, I'm going to say, his obsession, a mid-19th century quilting tradition. So let's get started with defining perhaps the term that we have thrown around already today, and that is occupational therapy. Vaune, would you like to start off and define what occupational therapy means?
Sure. I'm excited to be able to do that. I think there's a lot of misnomers out there about what we do and what we bring to the table. So what is occupational therapy? We've been around and have evolved over the past 100 years. The overall goal of what we do is to promote health and well-being for individuals so that they can participate in quality everyday living. In order to define the practice of OT, I find it really helpful to be able to base it on a couple of historical events that throughout the early years of the 1900s. The first one is World War I. This is where the practice of using occupation for healing was started. So the US Army recruited civilian women to care for the wounded, what they called shell-shocked soldiers on the European front lines. So they provided handicrafts, vocational tasks to distract the soldiers and to provide physical activity to enhance healing, both physically and mentally, so that they could either get back to their team out on the field or to be able to support them in the way that they needed to perform in their duties. The other piece that's really important in the development of occupational therapy, which is where William Rush Dunton comes in, is the history of psychiatric care. Through the approaches to treatment for people with mental illness has evolved over the years. It started out in the 3rd century where people with mental illness lived a life of confinement. Family members would put them in the attics or in the basements, and it was sort of a shameful thing to have people in their families associated with that. In the 15th century, they started to develop asylums and workhouses where people could participate in meaningful activity and be able to keep busy during the time and not be confined with their families. During the time of the 18th century, there were many movements that took place. The humanitarian movement, where we were caring for patients with mental illness in a humanitarian way. There was the hospital movement where hospitals were beginning to be built so these people could go someplace to get treatment and get better. There was the moral treatment phase, and then the arts and crafts movement. The moral treatment phase placed emphasis on being able to participate in physical activity, to engage in work tasks, and to provide opportunities to have normal daily routines and balance their self-care, work, and leisure pursuits. This is where William Rush Dunton took a huge interest in the arts and crafts movement, and you can see where quilting would fit into that very well. But he wanted to use the use of arts and crafts to be meaningful occupations that could be used to occupy, distract, or amuse the individual to counter the effects of less productive thinking. So the idea was if people were sitting in rooms isolated, they were having thoughts that weren't positive and certainly not healing thoughts. When Dr. William Rush Dunton worked in the Harlem House, which was after his time beginning in Sheppard Pratt, he accepted patients with mild mental illness, and gardening was already a staple occupation on the campus at that time. He introduced the artistic endeavors as a treatment modality. He used the idea of using crafts as a way to analyze the therapeutic process. In 1928, Dr. Dunton published his work with the use of arts and crafts and the use of activity analysis. And these are the first documents that were published with regard to the profession of occupational therapy in history. He looked at the benefits and the response elicited from using craft. He used the craft as an assessment tool as well as a treatment modality to help patients get better. He looked at things like cognitive abilities, ability to attend, pay attention, sequence tasks. He looked at motor abilities. He looked at social engagement tasks. And as you know, as quilters, it's a big social activity to be able to get together with the table and the round table and have a social experience while you're doing that. It looked at leisure participation, the ability to participate in a variety of leisure pursuits to be able to give you quality of life and satisfaction. And it looked at it as an ability to regulate emotions and a use as a coping skill for people to endure some challenges that they were going through the daily life. So as you can see, the use of arts and crafts both met the goal of moral treatment as well as the arts and crafts movement. So providing a daily schedule, balancing your self-care and your work and leisure, and all of those are what we consider occupations. So everything you do in your daily life are considered occupations. Dr. Dunton talked about occupation as being the most valuable single therapeutic agent that we have in the care of mental and the nervous sick. So the American Occupational Therapy Association has developed their definition of occupation as various kinds of life activities in which individuals, groups, or populations engage, including ADLs, which are self-care activities, IADLs, which are home management, community mobility, rest, sleep, education, play, leisure, and social participation. And OTs assess how a patient's altered condition, whether it's mental or physical, affects their body and mind, and to develop an effective treatment plan that helps integrate the identified occupations. So as I said before, the ability to bring the mind and body together to promote the therapeutic process.
And so while that explains occupational therapy and this movement that Dunton really started, right, was the first to kind of really formally start in this community. But at the same time, Dunton is simultaneously working on his medical writings, like the occupation, I think it's Occupation Therapy, a Manual for Nurses, I think was about 1915, I believe. He's working on his medical writings, but at the same time, he is knee deep in this history, this rich history of Baltimore album quilts and quilting. So that's where this dichotomy of our title comes in, that he is trying to marry both of these, and he finds value in that traditional craft from the mid-19th century. So that kind of leads us, perhaps this is leading us to why we are telling this narrative in the first place of Dr. Dunton. And Allie, let's move over to you. Let's talk about this exhibition, Wild and Untamed, that we opened up finally in September.
Sure. The reason we started this exhibition is, well, we sort of had all the pieces and it was like putting together a puzzle. We wanted to do something with our Baltimore album quilts. Our previous exhibition was with our hometown girl, Mimi Dietrich, and her love and appreciation of our Baltimore album quilts, as well as that of the Baltimore Applique Society, who actually, they are the two people who supported the creation of this exhibition. Their appreciation for this collection, it was so inspiring that we really wanted to have a Baltimore album quilt only exhibition. And I knew from Alexandra Deutsch, who was my predecessor, that we had in our collection this book called Old Quilts by Dr. William Rush Dunton. It's self-published by him in 1947, and it is the history of Baltimore album quilts. It's written 100 years after the album quilts were made. The album quilts are made 1840 to 1855, around that time period. So the fact that 100 years later, this person is writing history was interesting enough. And then diving into that, we realized that he had this whole other side to him with occupational therapy. And in fact, one informed the other. I'm going to quote him. This is actually from a lecture that Dunton gave at the Maryland Historical Society, which is now the Maryland Center for History and Culture, in 1950. He was there doing a talk on Baltimore album quilts. And he says, safety first being good advice to follow. I always start my quilt talks with some explanation as to why a stout elderly gentleman has an interest in this form of stitchery, because naturally I do not want to be called a sissy. I became interested in quilt making as a form of occupational therapy for the nervous ladies under my care. You can see some 1950s language in there. So I apologize if that is uncomfortable for anyone, but he really was trying to show that his interest stemmed from occupational therapy. You know, he is around quilt making his entire life. He actually donated to the Maryland Center for History and Culture, an unfinished quilt by his mother, who was an expert in needlepoint. It would have been a crazy quilt in the end, which he is not a super fan of. So he was kind of proud she never finished it. But he remembers sorting fabrics and helping her and doing that stitchery. And later he would, dabble more into quilting. But at the time, he just was really in that world. And so when he's creating, as Vaune mentioned, as he's developing these principles in the arts and craft movement, he looks to quilting and he discovers the Baltimore album quilts as specifically helpful toward occupational therapy, because unlike so many other quilts, they are not mathematical, they are not pattern-based, they are actually artistic expressions. Each quilt block, while some quilts are made all by one person, there were times when each quilt block was made by a different person. So it became your own little artwork, a way for you to show your skill. It could mean something about you. In the quilt that Margot is showing at the bottom, there's a temperance fountain. So it's a way for you to show something about yourself, to tell something about yourself, also to show off your skill. Baltimore album quilts specifically were so highly skilled. Someone actually makes a trade on it. She cuts and bastes the fabric and then gives them away. Because Baltimore album quilts were inevitably presentation quilts. They were given for someone's, as a gift to someone, often displayed in the home. So it was, you wanted to showcase and you want it to be special. And then all the women would come together and they would put all the quilt boxes together. And when you get that, you get that side of the socialization and of the community that Vaune also mentioned as part of that, seeing how you do with the social side. So in the 1840s to 1855, this is happening and Dunton discovers it and he's so invested in it. It really becomes a big part of his life. He goes around Maryland looking for Baltimore album quilts specifically, and he starts documenting everything about the quilts, the history of the women who made them, counting stitches and looking at the patterns and fabrics used in each square. And that becomes Old Quilts, which he publishes himself in 1947. Unlike his OT books, nobody wanted to publish Old Quilts, so he self-publishes it. But I think it's really interesting that it becomes such a big part of Dunton's life. I think, Margot, we have a picture of something from the BMA archives. It's his medical license renewal form. You can see this is something that he has to fill out to maintain his medical license. And if you look on the back of it, you notice it wasn't filled out. On the back of it, it's quilt mentions for different blocks and dates. It really, the two worlds are so intrinsically related that they happen simultaneously. And it's really interesting how his passion for this specific set of quilts and his passion for trying to advance occupational therapy just seem to meld together so well. he has an exhibition at the Sheppard Enoch Pratt Hospital in 1916 of quilts, in which he hopes to get women interested in the quilt making so that he can use it as a form of therapy. I'll turn it over to Vaune to talk about his relationship with Sheppard Pratt, because she is far more the expert than I.
Well, actually,
Lisa. Sorry,
yeah,
Lisa.
Lisa, Sheppard Pratt, as I mentioned earlier, Sheppard Pratt's contribution has been, Sheppard Pratt has contributed to this exhibit, Wild and Untamed. And Lisa, what you have been on the forefront of working with us and collaborating with us to get some of this information.
Yes. So when we are able to actually go view the exhibit for you guys, we do have a loom that was actually used by our patients, and also Dr. Dunton's briefcase, which is a neat little doodad that I thought was fun that we were able to still hold. So definitely, when you have a chance to come see, definitely take a look at our fun little exhibit. So and actually, the Dr. Dunton's work with occupational therapy started before he went to Harlem Lodge. It actually, when he came to Sheppard Pratt as a psychiatrist in 1895, immediately occupations were basically put in place for the patients. And so we built what is called the casino. It's not actually a place just for gambling. Merriam-Webster actually defines it as a place where people meet and gather. So the casino ended up being basically the house for occupational therapy. It contained all sorts of things, including a bowling alley at one point, woodworking shop, a printing press where most of our materials were actually printed by patients up until I think the 1970s. So there's all sorts of different things that it was used for, but also Dr. Dunton, as this picture that you see on the screen now, is actually in the shop working on something. So he kept himself busy along with the patients and was a very big part of that. So Sheppard Pratt's very proud to be able to say that we had a part in the occupational therapy movement and the ethical treatment of patients.
I actually think in the photo that Margot was showing before of the women who are weaving, the loom that you lent us is in the foreground of the image on the table. It's in the far left. I recognize the sticker piece
Yes.
and what's on the loom. So
Yes.
That's really, really cool.
So when Allie was speaking about that Dunton, it was in, what year did Dunton, in order to engage his patients into quilt and quilting, he put on this exhibition, this quilt exhibition, and that was in 1916?
1916, yes.
16.
And we
And
actually have one of the exhibited pieces from that 1916 quilt exhibition on display in our museum if you do make it out for the exhibition.
And I just wanted to put behind you, here's an invitation for that exhibition in 1916 at the Sheppard Pratt Hospital, Sheppard and Enoch Pratt Hospital that we have there. And we also have a really great picture of, sorry for the toggle, of Dunton holding one of those quilts at the exhibition.
And smoking. You gotta, this is 1940s, 1950s Dunton, just like I am a man, I like quilts. It's very much his personality.
So these forms of self-expression and this meticulous work, the crafts that require a high level of concentration, through participation in these tasks, in these types of tasks, pioneered by Dr. Dunton in the 19th century, are still used today, as we just discussed. And the philosophy that meaningful tasks of everyday life can restore people back into healthy, functioning life or transition them back into society. Vaune, I was hoping that you would talk now about how this 19th century framework is actually used today in modern OT. You touched on it already, but was there anything more to add about like how these guiding principles and so forth, this importance of community and self-expression is utilized today?
Sure. The preface, well, occupational therapy began in mental health, but you see occupational therapy working with people with disabilities, physical disabilities, trauma-informed care. You see us in the school systems. You see us in community vocational activities as well. So our scope of what we do has continued to grow. And however, the thing that sets occupational therapy apart from some of the other rehab professions is our ability to make the connection between the mind and body, and that just having a physical disability is not the only thing going on. If you experience a physical disability, there's actually a mental health psychosocial component to that as well, and the adjustment, the adaptation for what activities and occupations you're able to continue to perform. So we take into consideration as we're developing treatment plans for individuals who are having any of the challenge, the mind and body challenges. We're looking at whether or not how that disability is impacting your ability to perform an occupation. So we use a client-centered approach where we are using your activities, your interests, your hobbies, your leisure pursuits as a mode for treatment, so that we can increase engagement, increase the motivation for working on those challenges. And as we speak today at Sheppard Pratt, I can guarantee you there were 3 or 4 cognitive task skills groups where arts and crafts modalities are being used in groups this morning and on our various inpatient units. And we not only use arts and crafts, we use occupations like cooking and gardening as well to engage people in meaningful activity, so that it motivates their investment into getting better. We use these modalities also to assess areas. So we try to build upon to assess the challenges which individuals are facing to perform those activities, but also to integrate the strengths that we discover through the use of these modalities, and also offer adaptations so that you don't have to lose the participation in the meaningful activities that you are participating in. So things that we assess are cognition, your ability to problem solve, your coping skills, your ability to attend and concentrate, your social interaction skills, turn taking, sharing, collaboration with other individuals in your community. We may be also looking at strengths such as your ability to use resources and your support system to help you through that process. And the adaptations, an example would be, through the use of arts and crafts, we identify and recognize the types of cues and prompts that you might need to be able to be successful. So in the idea of arts and crafts, a lot of times visual cues are very, very important in helping people understand the connection between following a simple self-care task. So this gives us information to be able to translate and generalize the ability to use these functional skills and perform these occupations in the community. If we determine there's a cognitive ability, we may be able to help give adaptations and use your strength-based perspective to be able to perform those tasks daily. So again, using the tasks that are meaningful, important, and just resonate with the individual personally helps us to get motivation for the treatment process.
That actually is a really good segue into something I would like to share with all of you. If you haven't been into the Wild, if you haven't gotten a chance to visit in person Wild and Untamed, this will be a little bit helpful for you. But if you have, you might remember there is, you might remember, first of all, that the Wild and Untamed exhibition was originally scheduled to launch and open in March of 2020, but it was placed on an extended hold due to COVID. And emerging out of this quarantine, Allie and the rest of us on the team decided that it would be really appropriate to highlight this connection of meaningful everyday tasks that we were all experiencing and could relate to at the moment. So in order to reinforce this connection between real life doing and feeling and what Vaune just explained, that connection between a meaningful everyday task for the individual, we decided that we were going to replace one of our original interactives within the on-site exhibition with a video monitor to show the answers to two questions that we wanted to ask that we could all relate to. One question was, what creative activities helped you stay connected, happy, and healthy during your quarantine? And the second one was, what feelings did you have while performing this activity during your quarantine? And so within the exhibit, you participate by using the website or texting, and there's a live poll on this video monitor. What I'm showing you right now is one of those questions. This is in the exhibition about the feelings. This, when you plug in your information, this becomes a word cloud. But the other question that we ask is about the actual activities that Vaune was referring to. When you plug that information in, we come out with a bar graph, a bar chart. And actually, what I would like all of you to do is, you have a chance to participate in our poll. It's cleared right now. So that means that you have the opportunity to, if you look in the chat at the moment, you will be able to participate in this live poll by using your phone to text a message, and we'll get to see what your quarantine occupations are. And I know it might be a little hard to see these codes here, but there are directions to the chat. We'll take a moment to do that while we're talking. Go ahead and you plug in, you text 22333, and then the corresponding code here to either, were you baking? Were you cooking? Were you creating TikTok challenges? Let's see what all of you were doing during that quarantine session.
Mm-hmm. Originally in the exhibition, this was going to be a large loom, yes, similar to the tabletop one that we have, so that people could start kind of sit and have that mechanical repetition that comes with some occupations. So we really wanted to have that and to have some thoughtful questions. So this is our way of saying, you know, we can't produce that, but so many people are turning to occupations at various stages of shutdown and various stages of quarantine and isolation. So many of us are turning to occupations, and we don't even think of it that way. It's just that I'm going to lose my mind if I don't do something. And what are you all turning to help you, improve that quality of life? So this was our way of showing how occupations and how occupational therapy in a form is in everyone's life right now.
And to no surprise, we are seeing a little bit
There's
of
my quilters
area.
I love you, quilters.
So this is what you can experience within the exhibition, but a fun way to really hit home these ideas of what we're talking about today. So let's take a look at, I think we're kind of, it's still moving around, but I think we have a very clear winner. quilting seems to be
And needlework
and needlework. Yes. We had many people on our staff at the Maryland Center for History and Culture that took needlework and shared it with everyone. So not a surprise there at all. What about you, Vaune and Lisa? Are you surprised at the activities? Do they compare, or how do they compare with the activities that maybe you have contact with or heard some of your patients or what have you during quarantine? How do they compare? Are they similar?
Yeah, they compare pretty accurately. I know that some of the things that my either inpatients or people outpatient wise have spoken to me about is the need to have to adapt and change your occupations and explore new opportunities, because either accessibility to the equipment needed to do things, or especially flour and sourdough baking, or having it's been a good opportunity to explore some new opportunities. But definitely the kids that I work with here, reading and puzzling have been a huge part of their unstructured time here in the residential treatment center.
I know a lot of people who've done the puzzles. So many puzzles.
From personal experience, my grandmother actually was an Alzheimer's patient, not at Sheppard Pratt, but in Indiana. And one of the things that they actually used as an occupation was jewelry making. I actually have one of the bracelets that she made. So definitely the use of occupational therapy is everywhere.
Absolutely. This is actually a good time to talk, maybe to round out our discussion about what is our COVID reality now? Where are we now with these activities and our self-care? What sorts of thing, Vaune, is Sheppard Pratt providing to our community? And what have you seen as far as access to some of these activities and the way that pre-COVID or pre-quarantine and to now, like, do you see a change in these meaningful tasks with your patients, or what's happening?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, we've seen an uptick in admissions in the health system right now, either outpatient wise or inpatient wise, for a variety of reasons. I think, people are really struggling with the inability to have social interactions in person. The Zoom thing is great for a little bit, but you may find that sitting down with a pen and piece of paper would be a good way to send something in the mail, or changing the way you're interacting. I know the Zoom piece is challenging from a treatment team perspective as well. I think, as I mentioned, the decreased access to occupations. So if, being able to go to the gym and go to some of those places that aren't open, trying to figure out alternative ways. And like I spoke of, adaptations to those activities or exploring new options are a huge conversation we're having with our patients as they're getting ready to discharge. Also, I think there's an increase in people's unproductive time. So people who maybe aren't working, or people who are working differently, not having that hour commute, you have an extra hour of something to do with. So how are you filling that time? And I think time management has been an issue. I know many of the teenagers are staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning and having a hard time getting back into their daily routine for school or for the things that they're supposed to be doing. And unfortunately, there's been an increase in the use of maladaptive coping skills, such as drugs and alcohol, and maybe increased eating. So I think, as it works and comes back full circle to the idea of moral treatment, is that really helping people create a structure, creating routines, and balance their daily structure. So really that work-life balance is really important, and exploring how you can do that and keeping a routine. So if you don't have to commute to work, maybe getting up at the same time and extending your coffee time or doing something else, but creating that structure is going to help create it may be a decreased amount of anxiety or a decreased unstructured time where as Dr. Dunton talks about, is that unproductive thinking time where things start to circle into a negative place. So those are a lot of the advice, the conversations we're having with patients as they come in and as they discharge to help them cope with things a little bit differently now.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. What advice or things, tasks or things that we can do now to, what can we do now? And so I know personally, like I hear you. And when you said, staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning, like Allison and I, we understand that work-life balance and creating a schedule. That's a great suggestion, creating a schedule, or even a calendar, I would think, right, Vaune? I don't know if you do that with your patients, creating a calendar where you maybe block off some time for these activities.
And to look ahead for something you're looking forward to, which also helps people to kind of get through the week. You know, on Saturdays there's special hiking time with your kids or something different. But like I said, for a lot of people, it's been a difficult time to be able to do the things they're used to doing. But it's also been a kind of an interesting time to be able to learn how to do something new. A lot of people are baking that never baked before. A lot of people are gardening that never gardened. I've heard a lot of people talk about how many rooms they've painted through quarantine. Because they're looking at the same rooms. So it's definitely an opportunity to learn some new skills as well. So we don't have to think of it all as negative.
I mean, I totally agree. As staff here at the MCHC, we do sometimes share on our Zooms, you know, the things that we've done. We know Allie has painted a few walls.
3 rooms, including a 2-story stairwell.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah, I understand.
So it's great that you point out there are positives that are coming out from maybe a little slower pace of life. I know that's for me, that have come out of our current situation. I see that in the chat, there are people that are reminding us that we talked about technology and Zoom, and there are positives certainly and negatives to this. But Nancy in our chat was discussing that the use of technology basically expands the world around us. And she said that many people are watching bird feeder websites from around the world, which is pretty cool and interesting. And yes, you can watch these things from inside your home and even other places around the world. So that's a good point, Nancy.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take some questions now. We've got a little bit of time. I think there are lots of questions. Let me ask this question from Matthew. Matthew is asking, how influential was Dr. Dunton's work with quilts in occupational therapy? I think we kind of like talked about some of that, but you can add on to Vaune and Lisa might have some extra things to say about that. But was he inspired by similar pieces that came before him or around the same time? That is interesting. Allie, or I guess it's a 2-part question. Vaune and Lisa, do you want to take the occupational therapy piece of that?
I think it's a which came first, the chicken or the egg situation.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot in the exhibit. They seem to inform each other. I mean, his published work on occupational therapy comes long before, you know, 1915 is the original publication of the Occupation Therapy Manual for Nurses. His quilt exhibition at Sheppard Pratt is in 1916. He's been doing quilting with his mother since he was born. So I think he always had it lurking in the background. It's just that that thorough study of Baltimore Album Quilts. I mean, he is the one who writes the history on the Baltimore Album Quilts. He's the one that finds them and actually documents them. So I think that big project might have been ongoing at the same time, but the culmination is that book in 1947. But I really think that, as Lisa said, chicken and egg, they both work simultaneously to create, they informed each other.
Yes.
Yeah, I think as it speaks to occupational therapy, the activity analysis aspect of it is the part where it kind of sets us apart by using the response to and the reaction to the actual craft activity. Again, whether you're looking at cognition or you're looking at self-expression or you're looking at social skills, I think that using quilts brings in a lot of parallel activity and project level activity if you think about interaction with each other. So I'm sure he's using both to inform each other.
So there are a lot of quilt questions. So
I'm here with
maybe
your
I'll-
quilt answers.
Surprise.
kind of mix those in this discussion. But Dr. Dunton did not, do we have any records that Dr. Dunton actually instructed or had quilt instruction? Did he instruct his patients at any point in time, you know, in that capacity?
Sheppard Pratt doesn't have any records officially on that, but I mean, you can probably assume he was directly involved in a lot of the activities. We have pictures of him in the wood shop. We have him, he was very much hands-on as a psychiatrist with his patients and took the time. So I think we can probably make an assumption that he was probably hovering. He was certainly studying the patients to see how they were doing and all of that, because patient care was the 24/7 activity at the hospital. So I think we can certainly make that assumption that he was at least observing, if not somehow participating.
Yes, though he says he is never good at it himself.
Right.
He's no quilter. He's not able. He doesn't have the skill.
Yeah.
Now, as far as the quilts that Dr. Dunton discusses in the book, Old Quilts, someone is asking, does the MCHC have any or all of the quilts within that book or on his list?
Yes, well, not all of them. We do have some, and I believe that we have on exhibition all the ones that are in the book that we own, including a very early piece that is by Eliza Needles, who is the daughter of John Needles, the Baltimore cabinet maker, which has never been on display before. We have a few that are actually represented in that 1947 book. And what's really fun is that we picked out Dunton's quotes about the makers and then use those in the interpretation. So you could really look at the quilt as he did. I mean, he loved looking into the women who made the quilt, the idea of making, and that really goes back to that occupational therapy. Is he's developing principles. He sees it as a work of art, and he wants to know about the artist. So he looks at the women and he's like, why did she choose this? Like, why is she representing an animal? Like this quilt is all animals. Was she interested in zoology? So it's really interesting the way that he dissects each quilt. I mean, he looks at count stitches and looks at the mechanical making of the quilt, but then he also has that artistic expression side where he's looking at each maker as an artist, which I think is really interesting. But yes, they are on display. The Baltimore Museum of Art has several that are from the book as well.
I was going to add that, remind everyone of that too. We actually collaborated with them, right, Allison?
They let us into their archives to see that, but they have quilts as well as the Dunton Archives, which are a collection of scrapbooks. Again, showing you how much Dunton loved quilts. He scrapbooked. There's several scrapbooks there of his quilts. So yeah.
Now, the term album quilt, Alexandra is asking out there, can you speak to the term album quilt, which she believes was a category established by Dunton and not a period term? Also, she says, looking at the album quilt collection through this lens of mental health, how does it recast your vision of these textiles as bigger stories of connectivity, community, and creativity?
Sure. Alexandra is correct, and no one is surprised. Alexandra was the Vice President of Collections Interpretation before me and the Chief Curator for the Maryland Center for History and Culture. So Dunton is the one who creates the term album. They were called, he also refers to them as presentation quilts. The idea of the album quilt is because he sees album books as the predecessor. These were books that women would have, and people would give pressed flowers. They would write little sayings, do drawings, and then it would be sort of like a scrapbook, but not really. It's a book where people would give you little pieces of information, conundrums, drawings, watercolors, and you would have this basically an album of, you know, gifts from your friend. So the album quilt really becomes, instead of people giving you pages, they're giving you quilt blocks, and they would all come together and they would be presented to someone like as a gift. Sometimes for a wedding, sometimes they were given to men. I know that we have one that's really fabulous in our collection that was given to someone who was going off. He got a job, something in the Navy. So there's like the center block is a ship. And it was done by all of the women in his family, like cousins, sisters, his mom, they all contributed to this quilt. So it really became this sort of gift for him, much like an album would have been to someone or pre like 1830s. So that is where the album quilt comes from. And again, Dunton is writing this 100 years later. It wasn't really categorized as that during when they were being made. As far as seeing the quilts through a new lens, absolutely. I have spent a lot of time looking at our quilts. The Baltimore Appliqué Society helped document the majority of our quilt collection. So not just me, but so many of us are familiar with our quilts, looking at them as works of art. You know, we know that that's a history object, but we really saw them as these beautiful works of art. And now getting to delve more into the history, as Dunton did, that sort of idea of it being a social project, everyone creating their own little piece that they were very proud of, and then coming together and bringing them all together into this one big community project, and then giving it to someone where they were often presented and then put in the home to display. It really adds so much dimension to that history. And I know so many of our quilters knew all of this, and they probably have always seen that multidimensional, but I just think that the Dunton side, the occupational therapy, and how that helped grow into what is such an important study today really helps me appreciate the quilts more than ever.
I'm going to take two more questions about Dunton's quilt. He really, you mentioned he really did not like crazy quilts.
True.
And was it at his, when he spoke at what was the Maryland Historical Society, is that what he called, I'm sorry, what did he call them? I'm forgetting.
He calls them hideous. He calls them
yes.
horrendous.
Thank you. Yes. He
is not a fan.
He's not a fan. Can you speak to his objection to crazy quilts?
Oh, he calls them horrible silk things. Not a fan. Well,
why? Do we really know why? Do we really know why specifically he was not a fan of these crazy quilts?
Why is anyone not a fan of one aesthetic over another? Why does someone like one movement of art and another? I can't speak to that. They are very different than album quilts. He calls the album quilts wild, but only in that he says that the women who are making them are untrammeled by having to do a mathematical pattern. You know, the fact that you could create an artistic expression in your quilt square. You didn't have to follow a pattern. You could make it whatever you want. The zoology quilt I talked about before, someone makes a tiger or they make a squirrel, and Dunton in his book refers to it saying the squirrel looks inebriated. So Dunton has a lot of opinions about quilt styles and artistic ability. So I can't say why he didn't like crazy quilts, but I think it's more that he loved album quilts.
Right. I mean, his comments about being wild as far as Baltimore album quilts wasn't a negative.
No,
idea.
It's
It
the
was.
opposite.
Exact, right. So I think we're going to wrap up our program for now, but I do want to, Allie, how long is our Wild and Untamed exhibition going to stay open?
September of 2022 is when the exhibition will, so you have plenty of opportunities to come and see it. And we do tours for small groups, for families.
Well, we want to thank all of you. I hope we put a lot of information in the chat as well, a lot of links, links to Sheppard Pratt, links to our quilts, links to our website, our new website that you can explore our collections online. Not all of them, but a lot and more as we go on, where you can, I know quilters really like, right, Allie, really want to get up close and personal with our quilts, and the website, we do have a lot of Baltimore Album Quilts digitized. So that's a great place to go look and discover our quilts, and a great place in the chat to go discover some things that you can do during our current situation of COVID and quarantine and self-care that we provided with Sheppard Pratt and what they're providing for all of us as a community. And I want to thank Vaune and Lisa and Allie for joining us today, being part of this discussion. Please come out to the museum. We are open, and you can go online to reserve a ticket, a socially distanced ticket. And if this was recorded, for those who have asked, this is recorded and it will be made available in a couple weeks for you. So we will have that accessible as well. And thank you so much, and enjoy this conversation, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all again.